Today we're going to talk about the qualitative research method of phenomenology. Phenomenology is when researchers attempt to gain insight into a universal feeling or experience, also known as a phenomenon. This is a qualitative research method. Listed here are some of the characteristics of qualitative research. In qualitative research, there are small sample sizes. Data is usually gathered from surveys, interviews, pictures, charts and graphs, and observations, and is non-quantitative data. Data is considered emergent because it is helping to develop a narrative of experience that transitions us from an abstract understanding to a conceptual. The qualitative approach is intuitive in nature and expands the scope of research to finding out the why and how of things that happen in addition to the what, where, and when things happen. This characteristic of qualitative research causes the variable sampling for this type of study to be much smaller to work with than the larger and more complex samples used in quantitative researches. Let's explore the phenomenological research approach in greater depth.
Ethan is a psychologist who is interested in studying how families of autistic children cope with the difficult news that their child has autism. Do they feel angry? Scared? Do they turn to family for support or to medical professionals? Do they seek out parents of other autistic children to help them through it? Obviously, Ethan has a lot of good questions about how parents cope when they find out that their child has autism. In order to answer those questions, he has to decide what research method he's going to use. There are a couple of different research methods. One common type of research is qualitative research, which looks in depth at non-numerical data. For example, if Ethan interviews parents of autistic children, he'll have notes and transcripts of his interviews. How does he run statistical analysis on those? The answer is that he can't, because it is non-numerical data. He's chosen to do qualitative research. Let's look closer at one type of qualitative research, phenomenological research, and its strengths and limitations. Ethan knows that he wants to do qualitative research. He thinks that interviewing is the best way to go as far as his research study is concerned. So he decides to interview a bunch of parents of autistic kids. He's interested in how they coped with the news that their child had autism. Ethan is doing phenomenological research, which involves trying to understand the essence of a phenomenon by examining the views of people who have experienced that phenomenon. Think of the word phenomenon, and you'll be able to remember phenomenological. In Ethan's case, the phenomenon that he's interested in studying is that of learning that a child has autism. Of course, the phenomenon could be something else, like living through war or getting on the dean's list. A phenomenon could be almost anything. Phenomenology is interested in the individual experiences of people. It usually involves long, in-depth interviews with subjects, and sometimes researchers will interview the same subject several times to get a full picture of their experience with the phenomenon. In Ethan's case, he's interviewing the parents to see how they dealt with learning that their child was autistic. After the interviews are done, a phenomenological researcher like Ethan will look back through them, searching for patterns. Maybe several of the parents talk about how meeting other parents of autistic children helped them cope. That's a pattern, and it can tell Ethan something about how parents deal. Essentially, phenomenological research is looking for the universal nature of an experience. There are several strengths of phenomenological research. For one thing, it provides a very rich and detailed description of the human experience. By examining the interviews he held with the parents, Ethan is able to get a very good look at what it's like to deal with the news that your child is autistic. He wouldn't get as detailed a view if he just handed out a quick survey and asked parents to check off what they did to cope. Another strength of phenomenology is that the results emerge from the data instead of being imposed by a structured statistical analysis. For example, if Ethan gave out a survey to see what types of things parents did to cope, He could get a tally and run statistics to see which approaches were most common and which approaches parents liked the best. But that's still a relatively limited view. After all, Ethan is only getting the results that he can figure out based on statistical analysis. But with phenomenology, he is able to take a look at the big picture and notice trends emerging from the data. He doesn't have to pick a statistical analysis and run it. He can just look at the content of the interviews and see what emerges. But there are some limitations to phenomenological research as well. One major problem is that it depends upon the subjects being articulate about their experiences. But what if the parents Ethan works with are not well educated and don't have the skills to communicate well? That could lead to him not getting a good view of their experiences. Another weakness is that it requires researcher interpretation. For example, what if Ethan is reading the transcript from one of his interviews and he sees that one of the parents describes how her heart stopped and her hands began to shake when she heard the news that her son was autistic? What does that mean exactly? Did she feel scared? Sad? Angry? Ethan has to interpret what she said, which could lead to mistakes or false conclusions. Qualitative research involves examining non-numerical data in depth. One type of qualitative research is phenomenological research, which involves trying to understand the universal experience of a phenomenon through interviews with subjects. There are many strengths to phenomenology, including that it offers a rich and detailed view of the human experience, and that the results emerge from the data. However, there are limitations as well, including the fact that it depends upon the subject's articulateness and that it requires researcher interpretation.
Essence and phenomenology. The essence of a phenomenon is the universal commonality or feeling in the experience. An example of this would be people who've just been in a wreck, who would probably be feeling poor. Some might feel poor because they are physically hurt, others might be thinking of the damage to their vehicle, and still others might have been late to where they were trying to travel. While all people are feeling poorly for different reasons, in essence, they are all experiencing some form of stress. Phenomenology seeks to understand essence and enable us to explore solutions. The underlying idea of essence is that uniform reasons help to support why we act in certain ways in response to certain phenomenon. These patterns are what researchers are seeking to find to better understand and explain a phenomenon or event. Phenomenological research goes through 4 typical steps: bracketing, intuiting, analyzing, and describing. Bracketing can be one of the most challenging steps in the research process as it affects not only validity but also all other areas of the study. Let's take a closer look at what it means to bracket.
Beliefs and views could affect your research? Well, bracketing is a way to address this issue. Come on, let's go on a journey and learn more about it. Da-da-da-da. Welcome to another Journey with Chris, where we will obtain new levels of knowledge and awesomeness. Hello, scholars. Today we're going to journey through bracketing. On our journey, we're going to cover what is reflexivity, what is bracketing, and how to bracket. In qualitative research, reflexivity is an ability to evaluate oneself. Reflexivity is important for reflecting on one's own biases and preconceptions so that the researcher doesn't end up twisting around research data and making biased interpretations about that data. So what is bracketing? Okay, well, reflexivity is an ability to evaluate oneself. Bracketing is the actual process of setting aside one's own experiences, biases, preconceived notions about the research topic. Being reflexive and conducting bracketing is vital in qualitative research because we want to understand the views of the participants instead of manipulating their views and making their views fit into our own views. Also, bracketing is not just the researcher setting aside biases and experiences, it's also setting aside previous research findings, theories, and personal knowledge about the research topic at hand. It's important to bracket previous knowledge because even though knowledge isn't necessarily a bias, it can still influence how the researcher looks at their data, thus potentially twisting that data into what previous research studies have found, but maybe what you found is different from what they found. Okay, so here's how to bracket. Typically, bracketing, which is also known as an epic, is done in 3 ways, usually. The first is dialogue, and it takes place before the research project even begins. This is when you sit down with your fellow researchers before you start your project, and you have discussions with them about personal biases, your experiences, past knowledge about the research topic, and so on. And then you write all of these things down. When the biases and on, all these things are written down, this is called when this researchers say that these things have been bracketed. The next step is to either take memos or have a bracketing journal during data collection, analysis, and when you're writing up the final research report. These memos or journal entries are when researchers sense a bias or preconceived notion arise in their mind during whatever step they are in the research process, and they take a note of it. This helps the researcher to be sure that they're keeping their biases and preconceived notion, knowledge, and all that, keeping all that in check and having it on record to reflect on as the project continues. Finally, the researcher writes down their biases, past experience, knowledge, and all that stuff in the final research report itself. This allows the audience, the readers, to be aware of the researcher's biases and keep that in mind as they are reading the results and interpretations of the data. In conclusion, reflexivity is an ability to evaluate oneself, which is important so that the researcher doesn't let their own views and biases unnaturally influence research data. Bracketing is the process of setting aside one's views and biases about the research topic. And bracketing is usually done in 3 ways. Dialogue with fellow researchers, making memos or having a bracketing journal during the entire research process, and writing about the bracketing process and what was bracketed in the final research report. Thanks for a great journey, and I'll see you in class.
Let's take a little bit of a closer look at the phenomenological process in general. Phenomenological questioning begins with a topic. Once a topic is established, a researcher will need to begin by undergoing reflexivity by bracketing or analyzing their own bias. Once bias is accounted for, a researcher must begin to gather data to determine the essence of the phenomenon they are studying. Through interview research, surveys, and nonverbal representations such as pictures and charts, a researcher will begin to analyze data to seek out common threads. Once analyzed, the researcher will seek to describe the phenomenon in a conceptual way. This will help inform future research. Once the phenomenology research design has been established, a researcher must decide who will participate in the study. Non-probability sampling is the method of choosing a study sample in a non-random way. 3 common techniques of non-probability sampling are convenient sampling, which involves choosing a sample based on people who are readily available; quota sampling, which requires the researcher to set quotas based on the demographic information of the population; and purposive sampling, which involves choosing a sample based on the judgment of the researcher. 3 threats to phenomenology. Interpretation validity. To effectively interpret what has happened, the investigator will have to capture the observation as interpreted by the individual being researched. The primary threat to valid interpretation is imposing one's own meaning instead of the understanding and viewpoint of the individuals being studied. Researcher bias. Each and every investigator will have some kind of bias. Researchers must describe in their proposal the way they will take care of their individual biases to ensure they don't influence the conduct and findings of the study. Theory validity. Research workers need to ensure that they don't force the data to match a particular theory, nor can they ignore data that doesn't suit the theory. Descriptive validity. Research workers should record interviews accurately and completely. The investigator should make sure that the words and phrases documented are those of the person being observed and not a shorter form recorded by the observer. Advantages to phenomenological research include in-depth understanding of individual phenomena and data collected from individuals that is rich. Disadvantages include that it can be hard to completely eradicate researcher bias and that the data produced is oftentimes not generalizable. To recap, phenomenology is a qualitative research method concerned with gathering universal insight into a phenomenon. This universal insight is called essence. There are 4 steps in phenomenology design: bracketing, intuiting, analyzing, and describing. Participants are chosen through three non-probability sampling techniques: purposive sampling, quota sampling, and convenience sampling. The most prevalent validity threat is researcher bias. Advantageously, the research gathered is rich and offers in-depth analysis of individual phenomena. The greatest disadvantage is that it is often hard for the data to be generalizable, which makes attaining validity and reliability hard for researchers.